Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so excited to welcome you to another episode of About Her. Today we're with the wonderful Jess Saragos. Thank you so much, Jess, for being here. I'm really excited for what we will share, and I would love for you to start with sharing however you feel comfortable with your journey and tell us a bit of where you are right now.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Anna. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. A little bit about me. I am a coach for trial lawyers. I coach them in high performance principles so that they can execute and win like elite athletes, mastering their mental game and being able to perform under extreme pressure. Thriving also for the long game. And I do that through my company, The Legal Athlete. That's my coaching company and consulting company that I began just earlier this year in September after I left the formal practice of law to do that. And my unique approach to coaching overachieving lawyers has informed over 22 years of experience in law and business and combat sports. I've been a legal and business executive in law firms, in a unicorn startup in the creator economy, and even for Marvel Studios and Disney. And with that, I've also been an undefeated former boxer and MMA fighter, a former professional combat sports coach and manager. And what that means to me is that I am able to blend science, sports psychology, and neuroscience to help my clients master their mindset, execute when it matters most, and achieve extraordinary success and fulfillment in their careers and their lives without burning out.
Wow. Wow. I felt like when I've met you and this aspect of these combinations that you offer with the athletic side and also like the law side, I thought like, oh my God, how important it is in that field in specific, but like generally to talk about the burnout aspect and it's like mental pressure, which is so present everywhere, but I feel like even more in that area where you really need to be sharp and where every word really needs to like fit. Otherwise, there are like much more bigger consequences than in other branches. So I imagine that there are a lot of people coming to you with being burnt out or in the fear of like losing their capacity to work and to show up.
Mm-hmm. There, it's an interesting cultural dynamic in the law because so much of the traditional legal acculturation when you start working as a lawyer is a sort of glorification of burning yourself out and putting everything out there in order to work the hardest and put in the most hours and do the most for the firm that you're working at or the business and for your clients. And so it's been very difficult for lawyers who came up in that system, first of all, to even realize that there's a problem with it. They might feel burnt out. They might feel unhealthy. They might be cynical and experiencing mental fog and all of the things that are real symptoms that come with burnout, both emotional and physical. But they might not necessarily attribute it to the way that they work, or they might think that it's a short-term something that they can solve really easily. And so the biggest, I think, part of my mission in trying to end the culture of burnout in law is helping people realize that there's another way, and that what we've been taught since we were baby lawyers, that you do your best work if you just outwork your exhaustion, is not actually scientifically sound, and that you make the mistakes like you were talking about earlier that you might not have made if you had the rest and the recovery and the endurance that you would have if you were taking better care of yourself and allowing your brain to reset so that you can have the maximum cognitive acuity and resilience and response to really technical and intricate concepts under pressure that you can't respond to at your best if you're exhausted or you're in burnout. So that's been the biggest challenge. But when people realize that they want another way, that's where I come in.
Mm, beautiful. And I feel so needed. And especially the point that you've touched on, that this realization of, oh, maybe that's not how it's meant to be. Like I
Mm-hmm.
come from fashion. That was my first like
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. And it's the same thing that you just described, maybe with like a bit less of a ripple effect. But we too, there was like glorification of like sleeping under the sewing machine and being like badly treated by like big designers.
Mm-hmm.
But just for that's how it's supposed to be. And no one ever asked like, is this healthy? Can I show up as my best? Can I be maybe like even feel well or fulfilled? All these things were like kind of so unimportant. And that leads to so many shifts in self-image and health and burnout in
Mm-hmm.
various form, but recognizing, like even when I think about the medical field as well, or like so many other branches, is the hardest part because we kind of have been trained that that's the way we need to work.
Yeah.
That's like how it should feel. And if you tell like, oh, I want to change, I imagine there's a lot of pressure coming up from like society or like the law collective in general to say like, well, that's just how we do it. Like how to maybe that's like a thing to double down on is like how to even start having the courage to say like, okay, well maybe you do 20-hour days and work yourself to exhaustion, but I'm gonna stop here because I feel like that is like pushing against a really big paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
which is nothing easy.
Yeah. It is a huge shift to try to make. And it, if I may, it sort of fits into the larger sort of um, cultural paradigm. I think that, as you've said, is across industries, is this sort of big business view of people can just work for an inordinate amount of times, and that's just what's expected, and they'll be fine. You know, that's how you do business. That's the cost of doing business. And so I think the biggest pushback is when, although it's absolutely legitimate when you come at it from a wellness standpoint, because even though burnout is a wellness issue, business doesn't like wellness. They like numbers, they like performance. And so that's one of the reasons why I try to provide the science and the neuroscience of this is really a productivity and performance issue. The people are not giving you their best work. They're going to make more mistakes that could be very costly if you're not allowing them the rest and recovery and the rejuvenation and the full life that allows them to be their best and show up their best for their clients. And in fact, it could even be, in some ways, malpractice. If you've got, say, a surgeon who only had an hour of sleep and is super stressed, is that the surgeon you want operating on your mother when her life is on the line? It's definitely not the lawyer that I want in court on 1 hour of sleep and can't think clearly. Another way to think about it also is when you're not rested and your brain isn't working as quickly as it can, most lawyers and law firms work on a billable hour. And if a task that when you're exhausted takes you 2.5 hours to complete that you're billing a client for, that might have only taken you 20 or 30 minutes if you were fully rested, that also to me is a real business and productivity issue, apart from another issue, which I think is represented by you and I sitting here doing what we're doing, is that when people find a situation untenable in where they are, they'll leave the profession, they'll leave fashion, or they'll leave the practice of law when they could be adding so much to it with their creativity and with their altruism. And so that's another reason why I have this mission of trying to end this culture of burnout in the legal profession, is so that really good lawyers who are good people and want to enjoy their lives and do their best work don't end up leaving the profession in order to do that.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. That's such a smart way of looking at it. And I think that's super interesting for whatever like job you have. Is this like the one thing that you've touched upon is like, how do I, as your client, I as a burnt out individual, work on my paradigm to say like, okay, that's not what I want. That's not how I want my life to be.
Mhm.
You're maybe thinking a lot of wellness, a lot of your health, or your family or whatever is important to you as well. But if you try to explain it to your company, that's a whole another side of the argumentation where you go more on like the productivity or this like what you said. Of course,
Mhm.
nobody wants a surgeon who is on 1 hour sleep and then operating someone you love.
Mhm.
Of course. So maybe it's about finding two explanations, the one for ourselves that gives
Mhm.
us the courage or the purpose or the why to shift in our lives, and then the one like that we communicate to others, and they might differ quite a lot, which I think is important because like when I think about me leaving fashion or me even leaving my last job to start this coaching business, it took me quite a while to overcome this like, how should I communicate that to people? How can I tell that this is not the life I want? And this is not what I want. I don't want to feel burned out anymore. I don't want to like shake and wake up in the middle of the night just because I forgot something really important that could like really hurt people. So that's not the life that I want. But how do you communicate it to people who are doing it for 20 years? And I would have loved to have that mental clarity in that moment, which if you're burnt out, you normally don't have,
Oh, yeah.
to argue from a different perspective and say like, well, that's not the kind of like employee that you want to have. You want someone who is sharp, who is like really dedicated and also passionate. Because like you said, if you aren't, we're both here being good examples for that, you're leaving.
Yeah.
And maybe that's fine because we're doing now our thing in another way, and it's still altruistic and it's still important, but it differs from what we started with. But for like the bigger picture of a company, that's sad because people who are like really there with their hearts are leaving, and it doesn't have to be if they're like well treated.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, in an ideal world, we could make the wellness argument to a company, and that would be sufficient proof. But they are generally not persuaded that that's sufficient. So finding the intersection between where your interests and the company interests overlap, that's something that, I've drawn from in my learning and my practice as a negotiator, is where are our interests aligned, and how can we communicate that so that we get to that next step together. And another way we can communicate the cost of burnout to companies is that, um, turnover and refilling a position is incredibly costly and expensive for companies. And the person that you might be replacing might be irreplaceable. It might be someone who is such a high performer and so passionate about their work, about their clients, that it's very difficult to get another one of those quickly or at all. So the best course for a company who wants to fill its roster with really high performing, passionate people is to take care of those people,
Yep.
and avoid that kind of turnover as well. But I think, in addition to the culture that we're brought up in, as we start a profession, it's basically you're paying your dues, and you're expected to put yourself through that. I think there's also a lot of high performers who, are people pleasers, and it's very hard for us to set boundaries, to set limits, because we're taught that boundaries are a bad thing or a selfish thing, when really a boundary is what allows us to be so focused on our most important goals that everything else is outside the boundaries. So it's really just what am I saying yes to rather than everything that I'm saying no to, in order so I can say yes to the thing that is the most important. And so having having a good sense, not only that boundaries are helping you do your best work, but also it's very critical for us to realize as overachievers that uh, when we're working so hard and producing our work excellence, that it's not, it's just the product of us being a worthy person, of being a good person, a good professional. It is the product of it. It isn't the proof that we are a good person. It isn't the proof that we are worthy of accolades and appreciation and good treatment. And I think that's sort of the mental shift that a lot of us, particularly women, who are high achievers and who want to do our best and who are self-sacrificing to a fault sometimes, is to realize that we're not proving that we're worthy by overworking ourselves so that we can't do anything else anymore. It's simply the product of us being great and being the professionals that we are, and that it's okay to keep ourselves in a functional state without burning the candle at both ends, and we're still worthy and we're still good professionals.
Yeah, that is such an important part because I feel like collectively, almost to everyone I've talked to, like regardless of where in the world they're at, women in quite a like wide range of age have this mentality, this paradigm of I need to care about everyone else first before I even think about caring for myself. This big people pleaser mentality and this like cause effect argumentation in their heads of like, if I'm taking care of myself first and then look at the rest, then I'm a bad person. Somewhere deep down there is like this worthiness issue that you've touched upon that is so related to people pleasing, that is so related to like these overachievers. And the connection is not that easy to see, but it's so important to realize like we're worthy regardless, just by being, which is something that we haven't been taught, both female or male. It doesn't matter, but like we talking here mostly to women, is I think it's really important to like have this mindset shift of it's you need to take care of yourself first, and then you can fill everyone else's cup if you wish, if that's like part of your passion, of your plan, yes, but you only need to fill your cup, and from there the good things can come from. But it's not possible the other way around. So really reflecting to all of those of us who work too much, whether as moms or in business or maybe both, is like, where does it come from? Is there something that I don't feel worthy of if I don't overwork? Like if I'm not exhausted, is anything good still? You know, can I feel good with just being for a day without working hard or having everything checked off the list and still feeling worthy of receiving love or attention or even a payment check? Because you said it before, like you can do a task in 20 minutes if you're like really clear-minded and concentrated, or you can do it in 2 hours. But how much more enjoyable would your workday be if you are clear-minded, finish your task in 20 minutes, and then have 10 minutes to like breathe through before you take on the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. And you also know when something is taking you longer than it should. And that feeds into the cycle of burnout too, because you're less effective doing the things that you know you're normally good at. And it starts to be this emotional cycle as well, where you realize I'm not as good as I was. It must be me. And so you work harder, and it just compounds the issue that you're not going to overwork or outwork burnout. The only solution to burnout is to rest and recover and reset. And I think it's we've actually gotten a really huge help from the airline industry on this issue, I think, which is the paradigm, the instruction that everyone gets at the beginning of every flight is, when the oxygen mask drops, put on your own mask first. And it's so key. It's like filling your own cup first. But if you don't put on your own mask and you're unconscious, you're no good to anyone else that you love. You can't help anyone else next to you. So you have to put your own oxygen mask on as a survival tactic, as well as to be a good citizen and be available to help other people. And so I try to bring that up for folks who are suffering with burnout, is that this is your oxygen mask. You are going to go unconscious. You're going to be no good use to anyone that you are prioritizing in your life if you don't prioritize yourself first. And it's not a selfish thing. It's a survival thing. And it's not something that you have to earn through overwork. You're worthy of taking care of yourself, again, because you exist.
How do your clients react to this? Because like, it's interesting. I think of this often too. And my first reaction when I'm like in the plane with my son and this like thing comes up before the flight, I'm always like, okay, well, my instinct tells me to put on his mask first before I put on my own. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So
Yeah.
I think imagine there is a lot of like pushback when you bring up that example, say like, well, here's a paradigm shift for you. Do you fill your own cup first, even for survival? We're not even talking about wellness or productivity or like being worth the money we're paid, or the attention we get, but it's like survival first. How do people react to that?
I mean, there is resistance because it goes against everything that we've been taught, and it goes against a lot of feeling as well. And I never discount my clients' feelings. Feelings are real, and they come from a genuine place, and it's so important for us to be in touch with them. But feelings aren't necessarily facts. And so helping them to try to figure out where's the intersection between what I feel and the fact of the matter. And what you feel when your impulse is to put your son's mask on is my son is my top priority. And above all else, I want him to be okay. So the intersection is, if you aren't able to put your son's mask on because you've delayed putting your own on, you're fumbling with his or something like that, you're not going to be able to take care of him or yourself. And so finding the fact is, this is how long it takes you to lose consciousness in an oxygen deprived situation. And realizing, all right, this is why they make that recommendation, because there's studies, there's science behind how a brain works, how a body works. So that's where I come at it with the neuroscience and the science of how the burnout really affects a body and a brain, saying you're not imagining this. You're not weak for feeling these symptoms. The burnout is an affliction of the very strong. Someone who's taken on way more than they ought to for way too long because they are so strong and because they are so competent. And so helping people to realize that you're not weak for taking care of yourself. You're actually better able to take care of everyone else if that's your secret key to making it okay to take care of yourself. Yeah. But I do like to come back to the worthiness, is that, ultimately we have one life to live. And while we try to be altruistic, and it can be a central value of ours is to take care of the people that we love, even to sacrifice ourselves to do it, I think that there is a line between doing it out of love for others and doing it out of less than full love for ourselves. And it's that getting in touch with full love for yourself, I think that is also a really big project, particularly when we've identified as overachievers as only as good as our last performance, only as good as our last output, rather than being good people, being worthy people, being whole people who happen to have a profession and happen to have products that are the effects of what we are as wonderful human beings.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel it's a big shift to make for people to go from this people pleasing for like being a good person or for like proving their own worthiness to like reflecting on maybe I'm not doing it just out of like these altruistic reasons, but maybe there is a limiting belief that is
Mhm.
my reason because I feel unworthy if I don't, or because I'm not able to like operate any other way than this. And maybe I haven't learned it even. Maybe it's like it's such a deep rooted like lack of self-worth that that's my way to go to. But that's a big shift to see like, oh, it's not even that like kind of an altruistic thing that we tend to like explain it to ourselves, and that feels really nice, and that's definitely part of it. I don't want to like
Yeah.
play that down, but there is another part, and that's the one where we can shift, because I know you're doing a lot of like mindset work too, and I
Mhm.
feel the combination with the scientific approach is really powerful because we have been raised so brain based, so logically based, that it's so for taking things in, it's so important to like have this kind of proof side of things and not just a feeling.
Mhm.
But then again, it's very important to like look inside, like where does it really come from? Because the people pleasing, the overachieving, the results you're getting that you kind of measure your self-worth with, that are just like the effect, but what is your cause? Why are you doing it? And it's more powerful to do all these beautiful things from a cup filled, from
Mhm.
someone who really like overflows with energy of any kind. That's a whole different game we're playing. And I think we sometimes like the more we like kind of go into the burnout situation, we try to make it up with our workload or with our intention and with the time we put in. But actually it's thinning and thinning, and we would be so much more having an impact if we would be filled.
Mhm. I think that's very true. I think that the connection with energy is really key. Um, and it's important for us to spend our energy and accumulate energy on the things that matter the most to us. And sometimes um, a technique that I've used um, is kind of shifting the order of realization and action in order for the realization to come sometimes after the action, because action can be easier than realization. And what I mean is, um, for someone who's been struggling with burnout and with prioritizing themselves, it's much easier to say, okay, well, here's something that we're going to try. We're going to try in the morning to do your energy workout. You're going to do 4 things for yourself in the morning as a non-negotiable. And this is going to make you more productive and able to accomplish things. This is the tweak. This is the reasoning that our rational brain gets. And so it's you will move in the morning, you for at least 20 minutes. You will read or reflect on something for 20 minutes or whatever time you have. You will journal. You'll write something down, something that you've realized, something that you're observing, something in the room. And then you will connect. You'll, whether a friend or a family member or send a text to someone, you will connect. You'll have that community. And you'll do these things as actions, as habits for productivity. But what you're actually internalizing is it's a priority for me to spend this time with myself and give myself this energy in the morning, even if the reason that you start to do it is, all right, this is my productivity action. The realization may come once you develop this as a habit and you start to feel differently and you start to realize that you're rebuilding your energy. The realization may come that, oh my goodness, like I'm worthy of this. The difference in the way that I feel when I fill up my cup first thing in the morning and go about my day is so different when I automatically first thing get up, I'm doing something for someone else, and I am the last thought versus the first thought in preparing to really crush my day. And so sometimes that's a technique that we have to work on is we'll put the action before the deeper realization, the eureka moment that may come, a lot of mine come when I'm out on a walk. And it might not be a walk I felt like taking, but it was my non-negotiable. So I'm out there and all of a sudden the oxygen starts flowing and the neurotransmitters from me moving my muscles start getting into my brain. And I'm solving problems that I didn't realize I was just kind of gearing through in neutral until I spent this time replenishing myself.
There's 2 points that I would love to touch on because we talked about feelings before, and I think it's like really important to honor our feelings. But then again, there are these like the kind of like sneaky ones that try to make us not do something that is actually good for us, like taking a walk or journaling that 20 more minutes in the morning before you do your job or whatever task you normally do in the morning. And there is this feeling of like, oh no, let's just get to work. Especially if you're an overachiever, if you're a workaholic, if you like kind of have that routine to like take that in. And maybe the reason of having this as a productivity hack is enough, or maybe it isn't. But sometimes there are moments, and it's not as easy to distinguish all the time, where we are good to not listen to our feelings. Because if we feel like we won't do it and then we don't do it, we actually miss something that is really important for us, for our well-being, for our change to that version of us that we want to become. But there is this feeling that tells us like kind of no. The Kabbalists call it the opponent. I think that's quite a nice term. Just like, yeah, I don't feel like it, but I do it anyway. And then like you say, there are these like neurotransmitters coming in when you walk and you move your body and your brain gets more clear and you have these realizations and you have these insights that you maybe wouldn't have had if you didn't take the time for yourself. And the other thing that is really important with these actions, however small they are, I feel is the subconscious reprogramming that we're doing when we do these things, regardless of the intention. Maybe it is for productivity, maybe it is for wellness, for whatever reason. But if you do that regularly and take care for yourself, even for 20 minutes in the morning, your subconscious kind of gets trained to, oh, I'm the first thing. And it doesn't even matter so much, I would say, what you do. But if it's for you and you train yourself to, I put myself first, then it's subconsciously so much more profound than we might get on a logical level. If we just do that long enough, it will ripple out into other places. And I feel sometimes like with my clients, it's an impatience thing that comes in the way that says like, well, okay, I journal 20 minutes in the morning, but what about all my other problems? When are they going to go away? And the realization that is needed is this is working on all the other stuff as well, because you're working on the most important thing, which is you and your well-being, however you define that. So I feel that there are many layers to this, and sometimes it's important to look at many of them and to like really get very clear on how profound these little actions can be.
I think that's a huge point, is that, yeah, our body and our mind is going to interpret unconsciously the things that we're doing. And it's the converse too, is when we're spending all of our energy and all of our time burning ourselves out at work or for other people, our body is going to interpret that is that, all right, we are the last priority. It does not feel good. That is not something that your soul wants to hear. But when you flip it and you say, I'm first priority so that I can do these other things, I think that there is that unconscious connection. And sometimes that is what spurs the conscious connection. Um, I think also that you mentioned, feelings being important but not always feeling like doing what we think is our productivity hack, etc. That's really where I get into more sports psychology with my clients, which is when you want to be a champion athlete, say you want to be a champion swimmer, you are practicing every day, whether you feel 100% or not, whether you want to or you're not, because it's that repetition and doing the things that help you be the best swimmer you can be that are going to help you accomplish your mission, your main goal, your purpose. And so it's not the way that you feel on the day, but it is knowing that this is a small step that you complete daily that gets you closer to your big goal, to your purpose, that fulfills that commitment rather than maybe your motivation for that day, but your long-term commitment to achieving those bigger goals that are tied to your mission, to your purpose. And so I think going inward and journaling helps with this, and having time to think for yourself, to really identify what your core values are, what your big purpose goal is so huge for every other aspect of your goal, productivity or not. Because if you don't know where you're going, you can't, first of all, prioritize the things that are going to help you accomplish that better or faster or at all. And you can't reverse engineer then the smaller steps that you can take on a daily basis to help you accomplish that goal, to help you live that purpose. And so giving yourself the time and the mental space that you need to really get in touch with, what am I doing here? What is the most important thing to me? And then allowing that to help you prioritize and again set those boundaries so that what is outside of your main goal, your main purpose, is a lower priority that you can just exclude in favor of the things that are the highest priority. There's always going to be a million problems that you can solve or a million things that you should do, but are those the things that are the most important for you to accomplish your main purpose, your mission, your goal? And so it once you get really attuned to that, that's going to help your clients and you go through those days when you don't feel like doing that next little action. You don't feel like taking the walk. You don't feel like journaling. But when you can tie it back to that overall vision of how you want your life to be, how you want your life to feel, then you can find that same kind of commitment that a champion athlete does when they head to the pool on a day when they really would rather be watching Netflix and having a sip.
Oh, that is so true. And that is also, I felt such a big thing because maybe we could even like argument the other way around and say like, if you are not consistent on your actions that are like helping you yourself prioritize yourself, maybe you are not clear on your why. And I feel that is where many people get stuck because like in your example of the athlete, if the athlete knows why he or she is doing what he or she is doing because they have that really clear purpose, they have that really clear why, but how many of us don't? And that is, I think, the cause of like many of our problems is that we don't have that clear, let's say, goal, because this connection to the why, often it's not that tangible. If you may be doing something where the path is not very clearly outlined because it's something different or it's like far out of your comfort zone and you don't have that clear picture. So that's why I think meditation is so important and visualization is so important, because we can get clear on that. And if you have that why, I totally agree. It's so much easier to get over ourselves at some point when we feel like not doing the things that we know are good for us, because we can connect to that moment when we're going to achieve that why, when we like going to achieve that big goal. And that feeling is so much more strong. But if we don't have it, there is much more procrastination. There are much more excuses. There is maybe like, doesn't have to be a straight line always to our goal, but it is much more linear if we know where we are heading instead of like, kind of wishy-washy, letting ourselves react to all the things that come up in daily life, which are so many. So connecting to the purpose, for many of the people I talk, it's a scary thing because it requires reflection, it requires paradigm breaking. That's how we started, with maybe a career change or like a change in the way we see our work or our self-worth. So there are many scary places we can go in that journey, but nonetheless, it's a very important one to connect to the why. And I feel this like intangibility and this like there's not a clear roadmap on how you identify what is actually your purpose. So that's kind of something to easily skip. And if you do, it's harder to connect. So there are maybe professions that have an easier time. If you like want to be the best skier in the world, then maybe it's easier to figure out what to do next than if you do something that no one has ever done that you know of, or maybe even no one has ever done. So it's a big thing, but it's like the foundational basis of what we do to like recheck, how you said before, with everything that comes to us, to like see if is that aligned with my purpose or not. And then if you have that purpose, it's so easy to say no. It's much easier to not please people because you have that bigger thing in the background that helps you kind of find your path.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And to your point, I think sports is an easy analogy because it's so simple. I want to win a gold medal, or I want to be the world champion. I will be the world champion, for visualizing it. And it's interesting because so many high-level competitive athletes have such identity crises when they are no longer competing because they no longer have that same purpose. And so now they're like the rest of us. We have to figure out, what are we here for? It was very clear for probably much of their life to that point. And then now it's much less clear. It's very difficult to get in touch with that and figure out what is my purpose? Why am I here now? What is my next goal? And I think that's where, to your point, meditation is very important. Movement, giving ourselves time for it, journaling is very important. And then another thing that can be kind of a segue is having a connection to people who know you, whether it's your friends or your families or your significant other. Sometimes it's better even if it's not the person closest to you, because then they have their own feelings about what it is that you're doing. But sometimes just talking with people about important events in your life where you felt something big and you felt something good can sometimes help you identify what is the theme here? What is the through line? Because I'm not seeing the connection. And sometimes someone with a little bit of distance, a perspective, who's still part of your connection, part of your community, can help you see something that you might be too close to see. And so I think that is a key part also of just having that touch base. I've had a very non-linear career in the law. I started out in a law firm on the defense side. I opened a sports agency for combat athletes. I went in-house for a tech company. I went back to litigation on the plaintiff side. I went in-house for Marvel Studios and Disney parks and experiences. And then I went back to the tech scene and grew, all of these things. They seem like a sailboat, tacking. But for me, the through line for all of it was growth. My mission is growth and providing enlightenment and energy to serve the good in the world. However, I think the good, or the people who really need a champion or a warrior for them. Those are the things that have gotten me out of bed in the morning, is growth and helping people who need it. And so having someone help you make that connection who knows you but doesn't have a stake in what you do can sometimes help bridge that gap.
Yeah, which is so important for yourself to know that, because maybe other people judge and say like, well, that's not a linear career, and somehow that seems to be bad. I don't know, but it's like how it's collectively seen often. But you yourself, for you, it's linear because you have that purpose, and it doesn't matter where you are working on it, you are working on it. And I feel like the moment we have that, coming back to the connection and the why,
Mm-hmm.
you can draw so much power from that. So I love that you're bringing in the collective, because I feel often we don't know. We feel on that like hero journey just ourselves. But if you bring in the people who love you, might be friends, family, or maybe even a close coworker, can really like help you see the bigger picture or connect the dots from a different perspective, that can be so helpful to learn about ourselves and to see like what could be a next step if we don't know like how to go on, which so often is the case.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's so good to like draw to the wisdom of the collective, of someone who is like leaning towards you in any way and wants to support you, um to see like what you may have missed, because so often it's so easy to miss like big parts of what is so obvious to another one.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I always like want to ask my guests about the tools that they most love to use on their journey, and we have touched on so many. So um what I would like to ask you is, which is the go-to thing that is your non-negotiable for having that growth, for like if you are in a period where everything is kind of wobbly and you don't know how to get out of it or even find the next step, what would be the recommendation you have? What would you do in a moment like this to connect back?
For me, I think a lot of getting in touch with myself really is connected to the physical and to movement. I think uh, not just on the what happens, in terms of the neurotransmitters that happen when we move, etc. But for me, I've experienced burnout several times in my career, and what brought me back always was recommitting to my own health, and primarily how I did that in the most visceral way is through movement, through committing to a walk or committing to going to the boxing gym. And it does two things. Number one, it gives me that outlet, and it gets my body moving and my brain moving in ways that they haven't. Maybe particularly my job is so sedentary as a lawyer. So it kind of breaks out of that rut immediately. But it also is that feedback loop that we were talking about before, where it tells me I am worth taken care of, and that it feels good to move. It feels good to be in your body and to exercise that very tactile agency over yourself when you move, when you go from A to B, point A to point B, or when for me, when you give yourself permission to execute a particular combination of punches against a heavy bag, to give your permission to impose your will, doing something that you have planned. And it's that agency, I think, that is the crux of a lot of fear and anxiety in our world, because often when people feel stuck, they feel like they don't have that agency, that autonomy to live the life that they dream about, or they don't haven't even given themselves the time and the introspection to figure out what their dream is. They're just living day to day and doing the next thing that they think is the right thing to do, that someone is telling them to do. And it can be very scary to take that autonomy and say, no, I have a different plan for myself, or a different vision for myself. And I might not know how to accomplish that from where I am right now, but it doesn't make that vision wrong. And it doesn't make it something that doesn't feel or feed your soul. And so I think a big challenge, and for me, movement helps me get that on a very simplistic level, is taking autonomy over your life and where you go and how you direct yourself. So if I had one tool and I was going to forget everything else, my tool would be to get inside your body and to move for at least 15, 20 minutes a day. Half an hour is better, but move at some point in the day. Get in your body, get in touch with yourself, and tell yourself you're worth that time. And I think that starts to unlock a lot of different things in your life.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And I feel so many people miss out on that and cut out that time, which may be a big part of why so many people feel so stuck, because these extra 20 minutes, this extra half hour to move your body and feel good and like kind of get rid of the tension that you might have is what we don't give ourselves, which comes back to the subconscious programming and things. So it's actually, I feel it's, if you do it, then it's kind of like very easy to come back, to make that first step back to yourself. That could be done without any big effort, or you don't need much to spend on rather than that 20 minutes of time. But to like initiate this when you haven't for a long time might seem like a big thing.
Yeah.
Still, even though it's just walking, if you wish, but it's a powerful way to connect. I totally agree.
It is. And sometimes, I have a coach who said sometimes it's the start that stops people. And if it's too big or too overwhelming, it's you never get that initial inertia beater and get some momentum. Yeah. But when you make it as simple as, I'm going to go for a walk, you literally are building momentum for taking other action in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It's like sometimes I feel we're overwhelmed by the bigness of everything. Okay. So it's kind of a freeze mode that happens and we never even start. So I think that one of the biggest takeaways today is to find the courage to start taking care of ourselves, even with the littlest things. Mm-hmm. And maybe even regardless of how that looks like for each of us differently, it's this like inner willingness to, I'm missing the words how you said it before, but it's like a kind of giving permission to ourselves to care for ourselves, which I think is so beautiful. Thank you, Jess. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. That is so profound. I feel that's like the most perfect ending point. And the biggest takeaway to have this like initial care of ourselves, which can then ripple out into everything if we do take care, that we want to achieve these dreams that we might not even have had ourselves dream about in the first place.
I think that's so true, and we've talked a lot about it, I think, earlier in this talk, but one thing that I always come back to, without being fully woo-woo about it, but we are all beings of energy, and that energy is going to go somewhere. So when I find that I tap into replenishing that energy, whether it's as simple as, kinetic energy, I am moving from point A to point B, that can sometimes kickstart a sequence of events that can end up being a really big difference in my life. And then that energy ripples out to places you might not even expect. Your child might see, oh, she's taking a walk, she's taking care of herself. I can take care of myself. And you come back and you've got this energy replenishment and you're moving around, and maybe you're singing along with the radio when you did not feel that way when you first got up in the morning. That energy ripples out in ways we can't expect always, but I think it's a powerful thing that we can all do, is to be mindful of our energy and to realize that that we have it in our cells at our cellular level, and in bigger ways than even I or the scientists can comprehend. So taking care of that energy, sometimes we do it consciously, sometimes we'll get that data back to ourselves unconsciously, but I think that is the number one way that we can take control of our lives, get that autonomy, give ourselves permission to continue to ripple out that energy in wonderful ways.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you. There's nothing I can add to this. I totally agree. Oh, yes. Yes. Beautiful. I thank you so much, Jess. That was lovely and enlightening. And there was so much wisdom that I'm really, really happy that you took the time to come here.
Well, I'm so happy to have made the connection with you. You have such a beautiful soul and a beautiful way of communicating. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it took some turns that I wasn't even expecting, but the sum is often greater than its parts. And so thank you so much for having this conversation with me and
You're
inviting me
very
on.
welcome. I will put in the show notes your how people can reach you. So
Okay.
is there any other way than your Instagram that you would love people to connect with you? I know you have a podcast. We talked about that before, but like if there's
Sure.
any other like connection way, communication way that you would love me to add, then I will, of course.
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn also. I'm very active on that platform. It's just under my name, Jess Sargis, JessSargus on LinkedIn, and my company is The Legal Athlete. So it's very easy to connect with me or send me a DM on LinkedIn or on Instagram, or leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube watching the Legal Athlete podcast.
Perfect. I will definitely dive into the episode, so you will find me there as well.
Wonderful.
I thank you, Jess. I wish you a wonderful start into the new year, and I'm really excited to see how everything is evolving.
Thank you very much, Anna. I wish you the same too. A happy, healthy, prosperous, and energy-filled 2025 for you and your family.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.